Hello and welcome to Book Passage. I'm so glad to see the people in the audience. It's so great to have events in person again. And this event is both in person and online, and it will be in our archive. So if you want to see it again or share it with your friends, it will be on our website, and it will definitely be something you'll want to share. I met Will Schwalbe many years ago when he was editor-in-chief at Hyperion Books. And he was talking about books he was editing, and I was getting so excited that I probably bought too many. But this man is a brilliant editor as well as a brilliant author. I know so many people who have talked about the End of Life Book Club and who said that they actually decided to do that with someone they loved. And I thought, what a huge thing to have given to the world. I remember my frustration when my mother was dying, and if only I had read Will's book, but he hadn't written it yet, so that was a problem. As you know, he is also an expert on food books and edits some of the best food books out there. He founded cookstr.com. I can never say it. I can say Schwalbe, but I can't say that. And then he sold it to a big publisher, and he is still involved with it. He is a journalist, and you can find his journalism in places like the New York Times and wherever you want good writing. But he brings us here a book about the most unlikely friendship in the world. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it because Will's going to tell you about it. But here's a guy who's, a liberal arts major. He's gay. He's, studying ancient this and that. He is invited to join a secret society, and he meets the star wrestler who's big and loud, and they become friends. Seems so unlikely, and this is the most beautiful book about friendship. Whoever you are thinking you wish you had called them because you didn't call them for 3 years, call them. You will want to do that after today. We are going to find out so much about Chris and Maxie, a man who turned out to be so special, not only in Will's life, but in the life of children. So I'm honored to present this book that takes place in New Haven, Connecticut, in New York, in Hong Kong and Panama, and in a school for kids on an island. We could make him come talk at our travel conference because he makes all those places real, but the real thing is the human connection between Will and Maxie. And so I'm so proud to present Will Schwalbe to you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and it is particularly special to be talking about a book about friendship and have the most marvelous introduction I've ever received by my friend Elaine. And my friend Karen is here too. So this is really home for me to come to Book Passage. If there were no other reason for writing books than an excuse to fly across the country and come to this wonderful store, I would take it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you for a little bit about We Should Not Be Friends. And I start every talk by taking off my watch so I don't talk your ear off entirely. But you all have to make me a sacred promise, which is you mustn't let me forget my watch. My husband goes crazy because I leave something everywhere I go. And he always asks me, did you leave anything? And I always say, if I knew I'd left something, I wouldn't have left it. And inevitably I have. So, We Should Not Be Friends. I'm going to take you back to the early 1980s. I'm at college in New Haven. started in 1980. I am studying Latin and ancient Greek. I'm very involved in theater. I have writer friends, a couple mathematician friends, the odd philosopher, but I know who I don't want to know. And the people I don't want to know are the jocks. And I watch them around campus, and they move in packs. They're loud, and they bump into people. They wear their baseball hats backwards. And I just think, these people are on one kind of trajectory. I'm on another. And if our orbits collide, I will be obliterated. Now, something very curious happened to me in 1983 when I was a junior. I had a friend named Larry Kramer, and Larry was an extraordinary writer. At the time, he was most famous for writing the screenplay of the movie Women in Love and for producing that movie, which starred Glenda Jackson. But he was also famous for writing a very controversial novel called Faggots, which was published in 1978. And Larry had become a dear friend of mine, second father in many ways, and a mentor in my writing. And this is, by the way, this is bonus material. This is not in the book. One day, Larry and I were sitting around and had a crazy, stupid idea, which was to write a television series. And it was called Saint Crabs, and it was about a medical school set on a Caribbean island. And strangely enough, we sold this television series to Johnny Carson for Paramount Studios. And I left college, bought a ticket to LA, and thought, here I will make my fame and fortune. And I got into the office of the development executive at Paramount Studios, and he said to me, "What's your favorite television show?" And I said, "Bob Newhart." And he said, "Wrong." And I said, thinking, how could that be wrong? That's my favorite television show. And he said to me, when you're at Paramount Studios and someone asks you your favorite television show, you name a Paramount Studios television show. And that was the end of the TV series. So I did all sorts of crazy odd jobs and was really on the fence about coming back to college. Because I had some marvelous work and friends and was getting on with my life. And I remember I had a very heated conversation with my parents on this topic. I called them and we argued about it because they did not want me to go back to college. They thought, we're saving on tuition. He has a salary. And I think it was actually brilliant reverse psychology because back to college I went. And so that's really the preamble to We Should Not Be Friends. I arrived back at Yale in 1983. I'd lived on my own. I was very much enamored with Adam Ant and with the artist who was still then known as Prince. So my hair was shaved on the sides. It was permed down the middle. I wore a turquoise acid-washed blue jean jacket, and I wore on my arm a big leather wristband with studs that functioned as a wallet. And I know it's hard to picture, so you're just gonna have to go with me. So I'd had that, but there was also a very serious note entering my life, which is, since I had come out at the end of high school, I had been making up for lost time. And I had been having a marvelous time in Los Angeles when I was out there. And there was one person in particular who I had seen many times. And right before I left Los Angeles, he had called me. And remember, the year is 1983. And he had just didn't know what to do. He was losing weight. His glands were swollen. He had terrible night sweats, fevers. And I remember I took him out to IHOP and I said, I'm sure it's just some crazy flu. I'm sure you'll be fine. But as you might have guessed, he wasn't fine. He died. And as the news started in about AIDS, when I got back to college, I started to think, I may not live to see 25. And so I became passionately involved in the earliest days of AIDS activism. I worked on the AIDS Project New Haven hotline every time I could, several times a week. And it was this extraordinarily strange dual existence. So imagine then, I'm sitting around my room and a friend comes in, a friend from high school, who's a year older than me. So he's a spring term senior. And he invites me to lunch, and I go to lunch with a bunch of people who just show up, and they ask me all sorts of questions about myself, which I think is totally delightful because I get to talk the whole lunch about myself. And the next day he comes back and says, "You probably guessed you were being auditioned for something." And I lied. I said, "Oh yeah, that's why they were so interested in me." And it turns out what I was being auditioned for was a secret society at Yale composed of 15 kids. But this wasn't any secret society. This was one with a remarkable purpose, which was to bring together the 15 most different kids at Yale. And I should add, I never would have considered it if it hadn't had women. The day Yale admitted women, this secret society admitted women. And I sort of thought, why not? I thought if I don't like it, I'll just leave. And so I decided to go through with it. And when I arrived for our sort of quasi-initiation, as it were, there were 14 kids that I had never set eyes on in my life. And I had been at Yale for the 3 whole years. And I quite liked most of them right away. They seemed like nice kids. They were interesting. They did different things, very different things. But there was one kid who I thought, oh no, not this kid. And his name was Chris Maxey, known to everybody as Maxey. And Maxey was the prototypical frat boy jock. He was, in fact, a legendary athlete. In the state of Pennsylvania, where he had gone to high school, one morning at 10 a.m. in the morning, Maxey had captained the track team to the state championship. And at 3 p.m. that same day, he had captained the lacrosse team to the state championship. His arms were so big that he couldn't wear a lacrosse shirt. He had to cut a V in it to get them through. And I just thought, I can't with this kid. I'll just steer a wide berth from him. I'll get through the year. It will be fine. Now, this secret society had 3 very important traditions. One is you had to have dinner twice a week, every week for the entire year, and you could never miss. Another tradition was you had to give a presentation of your life that could be anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, where you told the other kids every single thing you could remember from your entire life. And finally, there was a tradition that for one weekend in the fall and one weekend in the spring, you would go away to a retreat and spend a weekend together, just the 15 of you. But the rest of the time, we had this, they called it the hall or the tomb, a massive 3-story limestone building outside of campus. Inside, it looks like Addams Family baronial. It's the craziest looking place. It was all ours and nobody else's, and it was totally free to be a member of this secret society. We were served delicious meals. We had an unlimited account at the liquor store. We had a keg, and this is very important, we had MTV. So over the course of the year, which is really the first part of the book, I get to know the other kids. I share my life with them. They share their lives with me. And I start to realize what an extraordinary place this is. And I even start to like Maxey. And that begins quite early on. At the first retreat that we went to in the fall, we've only known each other for a couple weeks by this point. And if any of you have the book or intend to buy it today, you will see a picture on the cover. And that is Maxey and me from the retreat just a couple of weeks after we met. So I'm still giving this kid a kind of wide berth. And we were drinking a lot. And I should add, too, when I was in college, the drinking age was 18. the morning that we were set to leave, I am really hungover. And all of us had shared cars going up, except for Maxie. Maxie had ridden up to the retreat, which was a full hour and a half from New Haven, on his enormous motorcycle. So I'm there having my Mr. Coffee and complaining loudly about how I really am anxious about being shoved in the back of a little sweaty car when I'm feeling so nauseated. And the next thing I know, there's a helmet being thrown in my direction. And Maxie is insisting that he give me a ride back on the back of his motorcycle. And the more I say, oh no, the more he insists. And so I find myself in the driveway. Maxie gets on the motorcycle. I get on in back of him. And then, and you'll understand this in the context of my being a gay man in the early 80s in America when things were very different. There's this daredevil jock. I'm sitting in back of him, and I think, do I wrap my arms around him? And then I think, oh no, then he'll think I'm coming on to him. I can't wrap my arms around him. And then I think, well, if I don't wrap my arms around him, he'll think that I'm not doing it because I'm thinking that if I do, he'll think that I'm coming on to him. And I'm doing all of these mental gyrations in my head. And Maxie puts the bike into gear, and we start tearing out of the driveway, and I grabbed a hold of him for life itself. And that was really the start of our friendship. And if you read the book, you'll see very late, I have a conversation with Maxie when I ask him why he did that, why he insisted I ride back with him on the motorcycle. And his answer surprised me, and I think it will surprise you too. So Maxie and I really bonded increasingly over the course of that year, as we did with all of the kids. It was an extraordinary experience. And we found ourselves especially bonding at the very end because we both had real doubts about what we were going to do with our lives. And part of that came from knowing how incredibly privileged we were. We had been given the opportunity of Yale. We had beyond that been given the opportunity of this extraordinary secret society. We had both achieved a lot at college and done different things, but we really didn't know what we wanted to do. Maxie had his heart set on being a Navy SEAL, but he had flunked the entrance exam. I had decided I wanted to do an extraordinary program, and because of my AIDS activism, that opportunity was denied me. So we had this conversation on the roof, and that was the final thing that really, really, truly bonded us. Now, as it happened, Maxie did become a Navy SEAL. He became an officer in the Navy SEALs, and he served for 6 years. I decided these people who hadn't given me their fellowship, I would not need it. It was in Hong Kong, and I bought myself a one-way ticket to Hong Kong. And I went there where within 10 days I met the man who is now my husband, 38 years we've been together. And Maxie and I would not see each other again until our 10th reunion, though we were in sporadic contact. And we just picked up right where we left off. And this book, We Should Not Be Friends, the story of our friendship, is the story of two people over the course of 40 years, losing ourselves, losing each other, finding ourselves and finding each other again and again. And realizing as we got older how important not just our friendship is, but friendship is. And I will say that friendship is, and my husband is the same way, it is the most important thing in our lives. I consider friends chosen family. And so Maxie has taught me so much over the years, and I know I've taught him a lot too. After the Navy SEALs, Maxie became a high school teacher. And then he had this crazy plan with his wife, Pam. And it was to found a school on an island in the Bahamas. And the school is called the Island School. And it's experiential learning. It's modeled on a place called the Mountain School, but it has Maxie's unique philosophy. And it draws high school juniors for the most part, and it's a term abroad. And they arrive at the school, and the very first thing they do is they have to take their phones and put them in a plastic bag that's taken away by the school, and they don't see their phones for 100 days. And Maxie wanted to create a place where the kids don't just study science, but they are scientists. And they're doing world-class research. And he created a middle school there for the local Bahamian kids, so they would have access to the same kind of education that he was offering these kids coming in from America and other spots. And one of the things that moved me the most about this is he wanted to recreate the experience that we had had in the secret society. So the kids come, and he lets them find their own friend groups. First couple of days, and predictably enough, they sort according to whatever categories of kid they think they are. And then a short time in, there's a kayak trip. And they all have to go on a 3-day kayak trip. And he's been watching them, and he breaks up the friend groups. And he puts kids, all sorts of unlikely combinations together. And they are so mad. But those kayak group friends are the ones that become friends for life. And the school's 20 years old, and he's seen it time and time again. And so the latter half of this book is just some of the things that I learned from Maxie, and he from me again, as he was running this extraordinary school. And we were dealing with getting older and getting sick and getting married and getting divorced and all the things that adults deal with that the college selves could never possibly imagine. But there's a story that moves me particularly, and it's an odd thing to say of your book, but I can say it because I didn't write this story. It's one Maxie wrote to me. And at one point, there's a letter Maxie wrote me. And it was quite early in the school, maybe 5 or 6 years in. And a mother had called him from New York, and she wanted to send her son to this school. But she said that her son was out, gay kid at high school, and was a very angry kid. And she said, I want to make sure this is going to be a safe place for my child. And Maxie said, not only will it be safe for him, we will celebrate him. So this kid arrives, and he hates Chris Maxie. He just hates him. He makes all the same assumptions about Maxie that I had made. And if I had to say, I know it's not fashionable for books to have morals, but if I had to say that mine had a moral, or one of them, it would be that as prejudiced as Maxie was against me, and he definitely was, I was way more prejudiced against him. I made all sorts of assumptions about who he was as a person based on superficial things. The fact that he was a jock, the fact that he was loud, the fact that he moved through the room in a certain way or wore a certain kind of clothing. And this kid made the same assumptions to the point where you have to keep a journal at this school, and it's supposed to be a private journal. This kid, a teacher had just seen over his shoulder what he had written, and it was in huge, angry block letters, and it said, I effing hate Chris Maxie. Although he didn't say effing. And so when it came time for Maxie to do the kayak trip, Maxie decided to go with this kid on the kayak trip. And what happened, this kid was much smarter and more evolved than I was, because it took him a very short period of time to realize how much he had misjudged Maxie. And he fell in love with the school, Maxie, the whole shebang. And there's a nice coda to this story, which is I have a policy in my memoir. I call myself a serial memoirist because this is my third. As I say, the beauty of memoirs, you don't have to research it. But I do one bit of research, which is if I tell someone's story, I send them the part that's about them, and I say, is it factually correct? And if it is, do you want your real name or not? Those are the only two questions I ask them. And actually, in every single case, in all of my books, everyone's wanted their real name, and when I was incorrect, they corrected me. But in this case, just couldn't find this kid. I mean, he'd gone to the school 15 years ago, so we changed his name, and we were just about to go to press, and Maxie called me and said, I found him. So I hurriedly sent him the part of the book which tells this story, and he said, that is absolutely true, and he said, please use my real name. So we were able to change it back. So the book has inspired a particular reaction in people, and it's the reaction that I most hoped for. And in fact, it was Elaine's reaction, which is it causes people to think about a friend of theirs. Maybe a longstanding friend or an unusual friend, somebody they met in a group. It could have been in a book club. It could have been in college. It could have been in a first job. And what I hope it does is it reminds them to just pick up the phone and give that person a call and just check in and say, hey, and it's astonishing, I find, how often you can pick up right where you left off. I told you I have morals, but I have a lot of morals that I've crammed into this thing, I really also want to get across an important point, which is that we can be friends with a much wider variety of people than we might think. I don't believe we can be friends with anyone. I think there are people we cannot be friends with. But I believe we can be friends with anyone who shares our values. And a lot more people share our values than we might think if we just make ourselves open to them. I also believe, and this is, I use 3 epigraphs because I'm kind of greedy with epigraphs, but one of them is by the poet David Whyte, who talks about friendship being based on constant long-term mutual forgiveness. And I think part of the journey that I've had and part of the things that I've learned along this way is that over the course of being yourself and bringing your true self to a friendship, you will say stupid things and you will do stupid things. But none of us, to quote slightly Brian Stevenson, are the stupidest thing we've ever said or done. So I feel so blessed by this secret society because the genius of having to have dinner twice a week for a year, never can miss, is that if we pissed each other off, which we often did, we had to forgive each other because we had to see them again and again and again. When I launched the book in New York, of the 13 of us who are still alive, 7 of us came to lunch to celebrate the publication, and 3 of us were there by FaceTime from other parts of the world. And that's how powerful the experience was of getting together again and again. And it doesn't mean that Maxie and I discovered that we're exactly alike, because we are so not. We couldn't be more different in so many ways. I'm not a physically demonstrative person. I would have been very happy in Edwardian England. I sort of like to do that to people. Maxie gives enormous bear hugs. He knows I hate it, but he insists on doing it. Now his wife, Pam, insists on doing it too, as do his 4 kids. So it's at our very first book event, excuse the language on this story, I ended what I was going to say, and Maxie said, I got a question for you, Schwalbes, which is what he calls me. I said, what is it? He said, I just got to ask you, when did you stop thinking of me as an asshole? And I looked down at my watch and I said, 10 minutes ago? But before I go to questions, I want to leave you with one particular thought. That is, I think, the single most important thing that I've learned over the course of my life from Maxie and from others about friendship. You'll see in this book that Maxie and I have been through a lot together. Maxie had a brain tumor. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. Maxie got divorced. And Maxie would share with me what was going on, and I was always there for him. But I didn't share with him what was going on in my life always. And he at one point took me severely to task for that. And I'd always thought that being a friend was, oh, I'll keep my stuff hidden. I'll keep that down. I won't bother people with that. I'll be there for them. But I think that the greatest thing I've learned about friendship is that the greatest gift you can give a friend is to allow them to help you. So that's my other thing I'd like to leave you with. When you call that friend today, and I hope you will, if there's anything going on in your life, I hope you'll give your friend that gift. Thank you. So I'd love any questions.
Oh, I have a mic. I did. Do I have to turn it on? Who has a question? I see one.
Well, I haven't read your book, Will, and so I didn't even know who Maxie was or sort of what the deal was with that. But you know, I remember you from boarding school, of course, and you were, you know, an upperclassman, so I sort of knew you as someone, you know, bigger than life a little bit, because I was, I guess I was a third former when I first knew of you. And what I didn't know is that there would be a parallel, as little as I knew you, really, in that my big memory of you was standing on the side of the tennis courts and feeling like, actually, I'm an okay tennis player. Actually, I had just been cut from the JV. That's why I was at rec tennis. But I felt like I probably was maybe a better tennis player than you were.
Oh, yes, I would. that I can guarantee that.
So somehow that made it so that I felt like I could approach you and kind of be your buddy or whatever. So I almost wonder whether, you know, whether it was some sort of a similar dynamic.
That's very funny. That's great.
Yeah. But it also struck me that you had such, of all the people on the universe who you had decided were not in sync with you, it was jocks.
Yeah.
Okay. And when I left public schools in Maine to go to St. Paul's, I was escaping jocks.
Uh-huh.
And then I arrived there, and I was put in the Nash dormitory, which was the jock dorm. And I realized I had not escaped jocks. And and then I was actually put in Nash both my first 2 years.
You weren't getting the memo.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it how genuinely menacing jock culture can be. And I didn't want to minimize at the start of this book the fact that these people that I was anxious about were genuinely menacing and had genuinely menaced a lot of people that I knew. There were some bad kids in that group. It just so happened Maxie was not one of them, and as were many others were not. But it wasn't crazy to fear the jocks.
I can attest to that.
Will, can I ask
Yes.
you a question? I've met you several times, and you are a genuinely buoyant person, open, warm, gracious, just a bunch of qualities. Is this something that comes from your upbringing, your family? Is there something foundational in that? Because it really is actually striking when you meet you.
Oh, thank you, Karen. That's so. I think it's really, in as much as I exhibit that, it's really a tribute to my mother. And that was something that when I was writing the End of Your Life book club, I really had occasion to analyze what she was doing in a somewhat dispassionate way that I hadn't before. And in fact, in that book, I put in a conversation that she and I had where I asked her, I said, do you always have to talk to everybody? Can we just have, can you go to a store and not talk to everybody? Or can you sit on a plane and not talk to everybody? If someone's crying in a coffee shop, do you have to go over and ask them if they're okay? And she said, I don't always want to, but how do you know if you're going to want to meet someone until you've actually met them? And how do you know if somebody wants your help until you offer it? And so it wasn't always natural for her. It was a choice that became a habit. And I tried to do the same, but I am a closet introvert and I really need my downtime, which is with a book. And a very funny conversation, or I thought it was funny, is I talk in the scene, there's a time when Maxie, who's the ultimate extrovert, and I are sitting on a dock in Eleuthera, and I am halfway through a Louise Penny, and I'm just desperate to get back to my Louise Penny book, which is kind of my mode. That's where I take refuge. But it does occur to me that the great thing about books is that the words don't change. They're always waiting for you. My Louise Penny will wait, and I need to spend more time with Maxie that night. And so I think being an introvert and embracing it is what allows me to make a choice of being an extrovert. And I must say, as she always was, my mother was right, because it's exactly in the moments when I think, I just want to put my headphones on this flight. I don't really need to talk to the person sitting next to me. But I meet the most extraordinary people when I choose life.
Tom.
So I have a question, Will. So I missed the beginning of this, but years ago, I went to a reading with a couple writers I knew. I don't know, Alyssa Chappelle and Jenny Offel, and they wrote a book called The Friend Who Got Away. It was an anthology. And the notion was that all their women writer friends had all screwed up a friendship at some point, and so it was an anthology. It's really good. It was stories about female friendships gone awry, whether it was through some kind of triangle or not being there when someone was sick. And I loved everything about it until when they're doing the Q&A, they said something about that male friendships lack the depth, and the complexity of it. And I'm a bit like you in terms I do talk to people, plants, et cetera. And I also have friendships that have lasted 30 years, and that are complicated and rich. So, but there's this notion, I guess, that male friendships are inherently superficial, like we all go watch sports together or something and never talk about anything real. So I'm wondering if you've thought about that with the book about friendship, about the preconceptions about men's ability to maintain an interesting friendship.
I mean, I find that it's such a great question. I find that in our culture, there's a constant confusion of how we were raised and who we are. And I do think that there is something in how we raise boys that discourages the kind of sharing that can put a friendship on such an important ground. And yet, thank goodness, boys are humans too. And I think most of us, just despite the way we're acculturated, we find our way to it. And I absolutely believe men's friendships are every bit as deep as women's friendships are. And it's astonishing that we get there because so much is arrayed against us. And I don't mean that in a victimizing way. I just mean it's just not how we're taught that boys are who you do things with, not who you tell things to. So one of the really moving parts for me of the journey with Maxie has been having him share a little bit with me about his journey as a Navy SEAL, from underwater demolition, buds, drown proofing, through active service. And we got a blurb from Sebastian Younger, and that meant so much to Maxie because the book Tribes, which is in many ways about men's friendship, men's purpose, and service, is one of the most important books to him in the whole world.
It is. More questions? There you are, my dear.
I haven't read the book yet, but I will tonight. It occurs to me that in the current political climate that, where basically civil wars being encouraged, that the idea of putting disparate individuals and forcing them to confront and communicate with each other might be one solution to the very complex polarization going on in our culture right now. And I'm wondering what your thoughts might be on, having been in that milieu, how it could possibly transmit to be a cultural or political solution of sorts.
I've been thinking very deeply about this. I wish I had great answers, but let me give you some mildly inchoate thoughts. I've especially been thinking about it because I visited several marvelous indie booksellers in Florida, and I drove from Miami to Tallahassee, and they are embattled there. So this was it's front of mind for all of us, but it was very front of mind for people there. My pessimism, if I'm pessimistic, comes from the fact that I always qualify we can be friends with a broader group by what I said, if they share our values. And I do fear that a lot of the people I'm exposed to on the other side of the political divide, I just don't think they share my values. I don't like how they treat our country. I don't like how they treat the Constitution. I don't like how they treat their neighbors. I don't like how they treat their families. And it comes down to, gosh, I think I have different values than these people. Some of them. But that's definitely not true of all of them. And there's a much broader group who I think do share my values and I theirs, not totally and completely. And so I think forced proximity is the answer. I was reading about a study from Eastern Europe that was done recently, where in one school classroom, they let the kids choose their own seats. And the kids divided up, and it was just like I was talking about with the cognitive. They sat next to kids who were very much like them in some superficial way, and those became their friends. And in the other classroom, they did assigned seats, as was the case when I was growing up. And in those, the kids became friends with the kids who were proximate to them, regardless of whether they matched up superficially. And I told this story last night at Rakestraw Books, and a woman came up to me and she said she was a school teacher and she always assigned seats and there were always marvelous friendships. And one year she forgot, and she said it was the worst year of her teaching group because the kids they split up into their little horrible little tribes. So I do believe, when I'm being optimistic, that getting young people together, maybe in some kind of artificial environment, is something that could really make a profound difference for our future. That's where my hope lies, and it's. I will say to you, it's not even at the farthest ends of the spectrum. I remember right after the election of Donald Trump, I was in my office and talking to a young colleague, and I said, "How was your Thanksgiving?" And she said, "It was a disaster." She said, "Political arguments, tears, recriminations, slammings of doors, breaking of plates, people who will never speak to each other again." And I said, "Oh, some of your relatives were supporters of Donald Trump?" And she said, oh no, we were Hillary and Bernie people." So it's not confined to the farthest edges.
We've got one question online from Carol, who's asking, she's curious about the Yale Secret Society and how it came to be, who created it, who supported it, and who kept it organized and ongoing.
It's a great question. So the Yale Secret Society, which is unnamed, was created in the 19th century. It was a scientific society. It was obviously all boys for the longest period of time. I'm not entirely sure when it got this unique idea of bringing together the 15 most different kids, but that's been baked into its DNA for many, many generations now. That's been, I think, at least 70 plus years. It has an endowment, but is also funded by the generosity of the alums. It's thriving. It has the most extraordinary people in it. It's kind of secret. It's not that secret. The rule was you can tell people about it, just don't be a jerk because they're not in it and you are, and it's obnoxious if you talk about it. But you could even bring other seniors into the hall if you wanted, just not. So it generations of people really value it and keep it going. So thanks for asking that.
Hi, Will. I've read about 60% of the book, so I don't want to spoil anything, but at the same time, I don't know quite how things end. But I'm really more curious about this being a memoir of two people and the challenges in writing that, getting Chris Maxey on board, even getting those on board who I recall you were somewhat selective in whose stories you told from the Secret Society, that is, who you talked about and who you didn't. How did you go about reconstructing, pulling it all together, bringing people in, having Chris Maxey's tale alongside yours, and presenting it in a way that was coherent?
So, and thank you for implying that it's coherent. I think I tried, so I'm glad that came across. The project started out of my wanting to write a biography of Chris Maxey because I admire him hugely. And he's an extraordinary guy, and I wanted everyone to meet him. And I went to my extraordinary longtime publisher, who's named Sunny Mehta, who's one of the great figures in the history of book publishing, and Dan Frank, my editor. And Sunny was famous for these epically long pauses. And I was told, if Sunny's pausing, don't jump into the silence. He'll say something at the end of the pause. He'll say it softly. He'll say it once. And if you miss it, it's gone forever. So I told him what I wanted to do. Epically long pause. And at the end, he said to me, I think the book you want to write is about your friendship. So I'd already gotten Maxey's sign off on a biography of him, which I think made him uncomfortable anyways. And I said, I want to do a book about the friendship. And then it became this joint task of us racking our 60-year-old brains to try to figure out what we did and what we said. And I put together a manuscript that was probably 3 times this length and cut it down. I used a very harsh editing mantra, which was if someone's story didn't directly intersect Maxey and mine, it didn't go in. My 2 best friends in the world live around the corner from my husband and me. We see them probably 4 times a week. They're not in this book because their stories don't intersect Maxey and mine. So that was the rubric by which I cut it down. I mentioned to you that I show everybody their bit in the story, and I did that for everybody who was mentioned from the Secret Society and asked them about their real names. It's all their real names. But the final and most important step was when I had the book the way I wanted, I sent it to Maxey. And I said, you have carte blanche to take out anything. And that goes to your wife and it goes for your kids. You can take out anything. And I also said, if you've lost faith in this project, just say, and I'll return the advance because no book is more important than a friendship. And he read it, and I was anxiously waiting, and the phone rang, and he said, there's just one thing I'd like you to change, and you don't have to do it, but I'd really like you to change this one thing. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, I know we drank a lot, but can you take out some of the drinking? So I am principal of a school. And you're 60% of the way through, so you'll appreciate this. I took out fully 2/3 of the drinking, and people still say, man, you guys drank a lot. So yes, that was literally that was it. That was the only change. Yeah, I differ from my fellow memoirists in many important regards. But one of them is I believe people's stories actually are theirs. And I get permission before I tell people's stories. Their stories don't belong to me.
Anybody else, or? That was a really nice way to end it, though. Did you want to ask one more question here? I didn't want to lose you here.
No, I was just going to ask, one of my favorite books is, I think it's called Remembering Denny.
Yeah.
did that play into your thinking at all in doing this book?
So, Remembering Denny is a book by Calvin Trillin, also known as Bud. It actually intersected in a strange way with my life because Calvin Trillin's one of his friends at Yale was Larry Kramer, and they stayed in touch until Larry's death. They've remained dear friends. Remembering Denny is a beautiful book, if I'm remembering correctly, about straight. Calvin had a gay friend who was very deeply in the closet, who died, and it's a book about friendship that is laced with a certain air of regret. But it's a beautiful portrait, as everything that Calvin Trillin does, and it affected me in the way that several other books did, which was this idea that most books on male friendship, someone dies. And I wanted to be a book on, and it's massive spoiler alert, Maxie does not die. And I'll just, so it's the theme of regret is a very present one in stories where someone dies. And this is a carpe diem book. I wanted it to be funny, first of all, so I hope it makes people laugh. But I also wanted it to be, if you're both alive, it's all good, it's not too late. And just to complete that, I'll leave you with one final story, which is not in the book. But when Maxie was having his operation for his brain tumor, and I went to see him in the hospital, and hadn't decided I wanted to write the book, but I think at that time I was still thinking that it was going to be a biography or wanted to write something about him. Maxie was saying something, and I couldn't really hear him. Maxie refuses to take any kind of pain pills whatsoever, so he wasn't even on aspirin after his brain tumor. And I was trying to hear what he said, and I finally realized what he said was, "Is it better for the book if I die?" And I was able to say, "Tuesdays with Maury, already done, no." And that's why I was particularly thrilled when the New York Times called this Tuesdays with Maxie, because he lives. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fabulous. And
And my watch.
don't forget your watch.
Thank you.
But thank you.